The problem with Strategic Command 1914 wasn't the game itself so much as the players. Once you knew that a successful technology was waiting to be discovered, you could cheerfully pour points into it without too much worry. Tom knew the risks, after all. Hearts of Iron was particularly susceptible. He could vividly remember trying the game as Germany, carefully holding back from actions that would trigger the computer-run countries. While minor events unfolded, he'd spent time and effort upgrading his troops, building up his navy, and investing in research into jets and nukes. When the time came to pull the trigger, the awful winter of 1941 was a memory, and Operation Barbarossa went off with a hitch. The world fell before nuclear weapons, delivered by Arado 234s. It was all just a question of waiting. Ironically, the play was historical as it ought to have been. Years later, when he was reading Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, his eyes fell on a desperate letter from Mussolini to Hitler, asking why Germany was kicking things off 2 years ahead of schedule. The letter was exactingly worded and carefully diplomatic, but it could as easily have boiled down to a very terse text message reading, "WTF dude, we aren't ready yet." Hitler had gone in without a crystal ball to the future. That's where history and games diverged, though that gave games like Strategic Command its own burden to carry. How to create the fog of war when it came to technology. So many games had messed with the formula of technology. Some hid the tech tree, while others gave random options, or limited what you could research at any one time, but the basic problem remained. If you knew what worked, you went for it. There was no fog of doubt with the player. It was more of an issue for games like Hearts of Iron, where the technology advanced in leaps and bounds. Far more than in the early 20th century. But the problem was still there in Strategic Command, lurking just beneath the surface. While none of the girls were soldiers, they already knew what worked. Money was being funneled into aircraft and armour, submarines and artillery. Everything was pushing ahead at a greatly accelerated rate, and while tanks had yet to appear, they were coming on fast. With more money to spare than most of their neighbours, Desala and Desi had poured it into Germany's tech tree with a vengeance, with other nations following one step behind. The German army had crossed the Marne, and were coming desperately close to breaking the French lines with an extended salient only 2 hexes from Paris. The Brits had managed to shore things up, and Letzi was working to cut it off and crush it, but with the current rate of English mobilisation, the Allies just didn't have the troops. It was into September 1914, and things were looking rocky. The classroom was surprisingly full this morning, which was something of a distraction. While he hadn't turned away visitors, it seemed that the IOTC girls he'd met had decided to show up in force. They weren't being a nuisance, as such, and giving them all a copy of the rules let them settle down and read. All of which allowed him some peace to input the girls' orders, which made him blink. It was turn 21, and after a quick break to confer, Desi and Desala overturned their standing policies to make a radical overture. It wasn't typical Giovanni thinking, and it just might work. "What's the size of that landmass, Cadet Agent?" Cadet Senior Agent Jedri Shalara whispered curiously. "It doesn't look like much." "It's called Europe. The map expands globally to take in the other continents, Cadet Senior Agent. The peasant over there is off on the other side of the planet, playing an empire called Japan. But from what I heard from Kellark, Europe is where the real action is." "It doesn't look like much." Prindi Amandis pointed up to the main screen. "I thought so, but according to Lark, it's where the most industrial empires are. She's the blue one in the centre. It doesn't look like she's doing very well in the south." Jedri stifled a yawn. "That territory she's trying to invade is tiny, and she's fighting off an insurrection. Apparently her heir was killed. That started everything off." Prindi looked up, discreetly trying to tuck her hair back over her left shoulder. "Ah." Jedri covered her mouth and stifled another yawn. It had been a late night. Looking at the map in a new light, she nodded. "That makes sense, then." Her country and Germany are pushing pretty well into the east, though. Prindy switched off her omnipad and tucked it away, reasonably sure she had an idea of the rules. If you don't mind my asking, I know why I'm here. I didn't think wargames were your thing. Cadet Agent, I couldn't care less about wargames. That's something for the Navy or the Marines. Deirdre crossed her muscular arms and made herself comfortable. That could be our next Empress. If I'm going to wait tables for her, I want a first-hand look at what kind of woman we're dealing with. ROs are active now. Prindy looked at the map. Germany led off the next turn. She has the right to ask us to fight and die for her. That too. Deirdre nodded. That too. Here we go. Let's see if this scheme of yours works, Disala muttered to Desi. Warwick had finished entering their turns and stood up to announce the results. Turn 22. NPC results. Warwick cleared his throat. Germany's overtures to Spain have triggered a coup. Spain declares itself for the Central Powers and starts with a surprise landing on Gibraltar. There was a collective groan from the Allies, and Disala smiled over at Sephir and Pris. Enjoy your second front, France, Disala called over as she crossed her arms, giving a satisfied look at the map before leaning into Desi and whispering, I didn't think it was going to work. Where's that put us? Desi poked at her omnipad, looking at the state of her lines. Honestly, it could help a lot, but I don't know. I think morale in the French units is low, and this could make them break. The Spanish don't have very good units, though. You just make it work for the army. Disala turned a lazy eye toward the twins, and got up from her chair. I'm going to use this where it really hurts. I don't like it, Caslin muttered to her sister, watching as Disala strutted back to her table. I don't like it either, but if the Spanish hold onto that choke point, we're cut off, Kamara frowned, looking between the map and her table of organization. We can make this work. Besides, Lark's making a lot of gains in the east and she's nailing down Serbia. Jack's invaded Greece. The Mediterranean is cut off, and we haven't made any gains just sitting here. Caslin gave up scowling at Disala and turned to look at the map. We haven't lost anything either. I know, but our marriage to the English is worth a sandcastle in a tsunami now. Kamara pursed her lips speculatively. If we're going to do anything, it has to be now. Caslin sighed and shook her head. It was a lot of extra credit on the line, after all. Fine. As the turn began, Sephir leaned into Pris. Can our army take it? If we lose Paris, we're going to suffer huge penalties. Our morale is sucking seaweed, but I'm redeploying. I'll start pushing units south as Letzi brings more English units to the front. The Spanish army is pretty poorly equipped. Pris looked over at Desi serenely before sticking her tongue out. We can take it. Just barely, but I think so. Good, Sephir nodded, but it lacked conviction. She plastered a smile on her face anyway, so no one could see what she was thinking. We have to work on holding out. We can wear them down. We lost 160,000 troops in the last 2 turns, Pris whispered hoarsely. 30,000 of them were English. Desi lost just as many, and all of them were Germans. We can stick this out. Sephir nodded at the board. We just have to hold the line and keep them out of Paris. Things will turn around. We're doing great, taking out Disala's colonies. Fine, let's wrap up our actions. Letzi swear she's going to have full mobilization in a turn or two. Once that happens, we'll wipe the floor with Germany. Pris watched as Kzintshki walked over to talk with Desi. As long as nothing else happens. Turn 23. No new NPC actions. Warwick read off his omnipad, his expression unreadable. Due to high morale, Italy leads off this turn and invades France. Pris waited until Professor Warwick finished reading off the bad news. Then she was on her feet, pointing angrily at the twins. What? What kind of empire are you running anyway? We had a deal. We had a deal with England, one of the sisters shrugged, while the other had the nerve to poke at her omnipad. It's not worth anything now, and honestly, it's not looking too good for you. Professor, can they do that? Pris ranted away in a huff. Who just changes their mind in the middle of a war? Professor Warwick looked up from his omnipad and shook his head. If we're being honest, Italy did. Constantly. Kzintshki ran a thumb over the back of her hand, stroking her pelt into place as she looked at the map. Things were proceeding according to plan, and the island of Formosa had fallen. The principle of caveat citaget, or value against the risk of capture, was serving her well. Of course, she had run out of places to readily expand, unless she wanted to take a risk. The might of the United States remained neutral. Still, Belda had been building its forces considerably, and there was nothing to be gained by striking east except for some unremarkable islands. England was having issues in Europe, but its fleet was uncontested. Attacking the large landmass to her south, or over into the area called India, seemed too ambitious. Keeping herself out of mainland China had been wise, and attacking her allies was clearly not worth the risk. Well, mostly. The French were looking weak, and if the empire collapsed, she could sweep down on Indochina with no one to contest her. She'd already secured a promise from Desala as far as German ambitions in Africa. Perhaps Madagascar would be hers. She could be patient. In the meanwhile, there was the deal to uphold. Dealing with her new sister was like explaining things to a child. The concept of privacy, for example. One only had a small amount of personal room in a warband starship. You did not barge into someone's personal space, though an invitation to food was an acceptable reason. Then came explaining what a skin suit was. She would have to explain to her bandmothers about bikinis now. On the positive side, if the swimwear became common, it would allow skin suits to become more innocuous, galling, but acceptable. Of course, then came the chocolate. She had not believed the Shilvanti had any sacred food, but clearly the chocolate counted, and a deal made over sacred food was binding. Yes, she would accompany Desi on this errand to the tide pool. Whatever it was, that was now sorted. But now she had to make good on her bargain. Madagascar would wait. This isn't going well. I pushed all the points I can into mobilization and it's just not taking. Without popular opinion, there's nothing more I can do, Letzi whispered, tucking her hands under her chin. Sever and Press are putting on a good show, but I talked with them. Their army's morale is on the rocks and sinking fast. A few more turns like this and their army may break. You've pulled off a miracle. I couldn't have asked for anything more, and your encirclement move saved a lot of lives just getting our troops on the mainland. Malondi pondered the board thoughtfully. I'm going to need to take a lot of our points and put them into a political move over the next couple of turns. Desi and Desala pulled a fast one with Spain, but I think it's time to return the favour. How are our submarines? Letzi frowned and pulled up the navy on her omnipad. It's there. I mean, it's looking strong, but the German fleet is staying close to home. Besides, it's the land war that's the problem. Not for what I have in mind. I've been talking to Belda, and she wants to bring America into the war, but the Sim still isn't giving her a casus belli. Malondi looked at the map and studied the neutral nations. I think it's time to do something about that. I'm going to use a lot of action points. Just give me control of the subfleet for a bit. Your wish is my command, Empress. Letzi arched an eyebrow and grinned when Malondi gave her a look. You should get used to it. One battle at a time. Just let me write the orders for our subs. Tom had to keep his face scrumptiously neutral, but it wasn't always easy. As he read through the orders, it was hard not to look surprised. Casualty rates were high everywhere, and the Central Powers were pressing hard into Russia, though in the West, diplomacy was having an effect. The twins had mobilized Italy to invade along the south of France, and were driving west to link up to the Spanish, but Pris and Sephir hadn't sat by. and while it didn't show on the main board, their diplomatic work in Spain was adding up. If they kept it up, there was a rapidly growing chance of revolt in Catalonia. In Asia, Kzintshki had been securing her gains. While mainland China was furious at the Japanese, the NPC nation was essentially impotent. Having taken a generous share of colonial Asia, she'd opted to stop and... Wait, the Japanese army was going where? Jaxmy's Ottomans were churning their way across Greece, and while she was having problems to her south, she largely stayed neutral, leaving Nespa's Russian Empire to face Germany and the Austrians. Russia was shrinking back, but a good bit slower than had happened historically. As for England, Tom read the orders a second time, then a third before putting them in. As a move, it was insidious. I don't know if I should be proud or terrified. She's definitely not thinking like a Shilvanti. Malondi and Letzi had redeployed the English submarine fleet. It was February 1915, and the Empress of England staked it all on one stone-cold throw of the dice. Deirdre Shalara didn't shake her head. With Agent Davari waiting in the wing, she didn't dare. Still, it was hard not to feel a certain exasperation. One day you'd never heard of Malondi Sandoka, second-year student, and the next day she turned out to be Princess Kalira Tassu, while an actual special agent was dragging you out in the middle of the night. Not just an agent, or a senior agent, a special agent, serving the imperial family directly, and with no visible sense of humour. Not only that, but the princess looked to be losing her war. It was discouraging. "It's not her fault," whispered Cadet Relais. "England just can't mobilise." It wasn't promising. Following an empress was a badge of honour, but you hoped for one that could manage things better than not her fault. The simulation would be wrapping up for the day soon. Then tomorrow, she'd have to convince her girls to go out and learn to wait tables. A degrading affair for a princess that was looking a bit lackluster. Unless things changed, the Empire of France would fall, and the English were doomed to try and blockade a continent they couldn't land on. It wasn't promising at all. She watched as the human got up to announce the last turn of the morning. Turn 3 of 1915. The RMS Lusitania has been sunk off Ireland with no survivors. Due to recurring losses of American citizens, the United States now has a casus belli on Germany. At the same time, ships belonging to Sweden and Norway have been lost in the North Sea. With over 3,500 civilian casualties, both nations have cancelled their neutrality and are joining the Allies. Warwick hit a few keys, and the map on the wall changed, with nations that had previously shown a neutral white flared blue on the side of England. Belgium and the Netherlands have also issued protests and closed their borders to Germany, and the Japanese army pulls landings at Aden and Jeddah. The Arabs do not contest. Diplomacy and final turns, please. "Those sinkings weren't us," Desada protested. "We didn't do any of them." "You can't prove it wasn't." Nespa crowed with relish, and it wasn't hard to see why. Up on the board, her northern flank against Germany had stabilised, as Scandinavian forces mobilised and the United States declared war. "But it wasn't us!" Desala protested louder, glaring back. "I guess someone shouldn't have declared unrestricted submarine warfare." Malondi crossed her arms and arched an eyebrow, a satisfied smile slowly spreading across her face. Desala's eyes widened. You did this! You know what you..." she spluttered, flashing blue with outrage. "Your submarines did this!" "I haven't the faintest idea what you mean." Malondi casually examined her nails. "Russia is right. This is a barbarous act on Germany's part. Oh, and England is mobilising to a full war economy." Cheers erupted from the audience. "Right. I can't call this a class, but that's the sim for today. Tom leaned back against the desk, looking up into the crowd. The classroom had over 40 girls in it, and while it could hold far more, it was more of a crowd than he was used to. Not addressing them felt rude. So, for those of you who are new here, do you have any questions? There were several mutters, and girls looked at one another. It had to be a Shilvanti thing. He'd seen it in his humanity class until the girls accepted him. He'd seen it teaching the Marriage Fundamentals seminar. Jama was right. In its proper setting, Shilvanti women revered men, and when the card was played right, a male authority figure could be daunting. Of course, there were improper settings. A lot of them. But here and now in his own domain, he could roll with it. Settling in and looking at them expectantly usually did the trick, and after canting his head for emphasis, a few hands nervously went up. Yes, miss. The girl was slim, with long hair pinned back on one side, and she'd raised her hand like she was afraid it would get chewed off. Still, of the 5 or 6 hands in the air, hers had been first, and she'd definitely been paying attention. Throughout the morning, the IOTC girls had been sitting there, rigidly, talking quietly amongst themselves after the first hour, but not making a nuisance of themselves. This girl had been watching. They'd applauded Melondi's maneuver. Their enthusiasm was understandable. Now they knew she was a princess. The covert actions had been appalling, but might well have turned the course of the war. Regardless, it was clear who the IOTC was rooting for now. That was worth something. Cadet Agent Prindi Amandis, sir. The girl shot to her feet and stood there rigidly. Ah, that again. At ease, Cadet. You don't have to stand up. I prefer my students to be relaxed and thinking about the material. A wave of uncertainty dawned on her features, and he pressed through it before the girl locked up. What's your question, Miss Amandis? Sir, yes, sir. The girl's face was a mask of agonized uncertainty, but she took the lifeline. It's just, your teaching style is very different, and I was wondering, what lesson are your students supposed to learn from this? Now that was an interesting question. He'd fully expected that he'd have to trot out his explanation on the Socratic method, but the girl had moved right past that and into something new. My job is to expose my students to the material as accurately as possible, and guide them toward conclusions that have stood the test of time. That said, they're free to draw their own insights and discuss and defend them as they see fit. Tom licked his lips and decided to give the girl a positive nudge. It had been a good question, after all. I hope you'll come back for the next session, Miss Amandis. Once you've had the chance to mull over what you've seen, perhaps you'll tell me the lesson that you are learning from this. Tom looked over at the next girl, hoping to build some momentum. Your question, miss. The next girl wore her hair tomboy short, and she had that certain look to her. She could have been a rookie recruit in a police academy, ROTC, or fresh into basic, but mostly what it said was, "Hi, I'm eager." She shot to her feet and grinned. The standing at attention he could deal with another time. At least they were talking. Sir, Cadet Agent Elidry, sir. Okay, eager or looking to impress. That'd be cute if the interior wasn't keen on being so damn terrifying. He nodded, giving her a slow grin, and it was nice to see her smile get a fraction more genuine. Noted. And your question? Sir, the simulation that you're running, I was wondering, will you be running it again? Elidry glanced at the girls to either side of her. It's just, well, we'd kind of like to give it a try. That was a poser. Sure, what the hell. Depending on how well this works, I'll repeat it for the next time I teach the Starting Humanity course, though next semester I'm going to get into our Second World War. If this format seems effective, I'll probably repeat the sim. There might be a few extra positions open if you're interested. It was reasonable, and he was on a 3-year contract, at least. Still, if you don't mind my asking, Cadet, your IOTC? Sir, yes sir. If they could bottle enthusiasm, this girl would be a goldmine. I understand the role of the interior. They've had a distinct presence on my homeworld, now and then. And of course they act as the eyes and ears of the Empress. Even if the Ministry could have defined scope creep, that was still broadly true, which made the interest in this exercise curious. If it was all just to cozy up to Mel, he'd probably need to shut this down. I could understand it with the MOTC or the Navy cadets, but a war sim seems a bit out of the mainstream for the interior. Circumstances notwithstanding, like your princess being here. I was wondering what you're finding interesting, Cadet. Sir, well... The girl was looking around a bit for moral support, but that seemed par for the course. To her credit, she mostly looked him in the eyes. Speaking for myself, sir? That is entirely the point, yes. In your own words, please. Sir. Cadet Eager went to attention, but frowned in thought, working it through. The interior is called on to deal with insurrections and rebellions, and to prevent problems before they happen. Just for me, sir. I want to learn why people will fight. I want to understand the motivations, sir. Fair enough, Cadet. I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your name again? Elidry, sir. Cadet Agent Vandra Elidry, sir. Alright, that's fair. I covered the reasons for this conflict in an earlier class, but if you're interested in what got this conflict rolling, get with me after the questions. I can give you the files. One of the older girls raised her hand. She was a beefy specimen with more bling on her tunic, but while he'd had disagreements with people at the academy, no one here was stupid. Yes, miss? Sir, Cadet Senior Agent Jaidri Shalara. The girl stood up respectfully. She was slower than Elidry, but that wasn't saying anything. If Elidry was like that all the time. Sir, I'm trying to understand the participants. It seems to me the Osratan Empire had every right to use force against the Serb Empire, but why did the others get involved? I'd like a copy of the files too, but everyone got involved when the Austrans had the right. Why didn't they just mind their own business, sir? It was an astute question, for someone coming at the material cold. It wasn't asking his opinion of why, rather than the facts of what was. But the premise, that was Shilvanti. That was Shilvanti in the worst way possible. Cadet Senior Agent. The girl was in charge of the others and Melondi needed them, but this was about teaching, and Tom mulled it over before answering. It's pronounced Austrians. This will be a simplistic answer, but I want to challenge your premise here. Just be sure I understand. You're contending that the Austrians had the moral authority in this situation. Sir, well, yes, I am. The girl held her ground, pursing her lips thoughtfully. The Austrians? The Austrians lost their heir. They had the right to take action. So, essentially, they had the might. So they had the right? Well, being simplistic, yes, sir. They had the might, so they had the right. And that's wrong. Cadet, might should be used for right. Might cannot make right. All the innocent civilians that suffered and died in this had nothing to do with. Tom felt the anger rising inside him and pushed it down, hard. This was about a history lesson, not his personal history. He took a moment and tried again. Force projection does not equate to moral authority, and it can't change the facts. The Austrians had a contentious relationship with the Serbians, and there was really no evidence that the Serbian government had been complicit in the deaths. Austria used their heir's death as a pretext. If you look at the motives at this period in my history, and compare it to your wars of consolidation, you'll see some real similarities. None more so than join us or we'll open fire. Does it never change? Personally, I'd like you to consider the cost, Miss Shalara. Right now the sim is in turn 3 of the year 1915. Historically, about 4 months earlier, there was a battle, right here at this river. The troops on both sides, the people who bled and died in the trenches, were just as blameless as the civilians. Tom took his pointer and gestured up at the Marne. The growling animal in his chest quieted down as he got on with it, at least for now, pulling up the figures on the first Battle of the Marne. Now, I know the Imperium is vast, so let's give those figures some scope. Just add a 0. And? Shalara blinked. Then her face twisted in a grimace of distaste. Sir, with respect, no one would lose 5 million troops. Even adjusting it, that sounds preposterous. It isn't. And we did. Over 500,000 dead in just 6 days. Shalara was still on her feet, but the IOTC girls were looking like he'd hit them with a club. The girls in his own class? Not so much. Was that good, bad, or something else entirely? What lesson are you trying to teach here? Look, we've strayed off the point a little, but I want to speak to this, and to you, Cadet Eladri. You see, humans have 3 rules. The Golden Rule, the Silver Rule, and the Iron Rule. It felt like he was punishing Shalara unfairly, and Tom turned to glance at his girls. They were all paying attention, though Kzintshki was giving him that unmoving look of motionless concentration that made him wonder if he was still on the menu. The first one, the Golden Rule, taught us that you do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, that you treat others the way you hope to be treated. Tom looked up at the girls, seeing if the idea sank in. They were thoughtful looks, so he pressed on. The last one, the Iron Rule, says you treat others however you want. It's saying your might makes you right and to the deets with anyone else. A long time ago, there was a human named Confucius. When a student told him about the rules, he said, "If you are like iron and do ill toward everyone, you ensure everyone will always do ill towards you. But if you are like gold and naively reward people who do you ill with goodness, then how do you properly reward goodness?" Tom let the wheels turn. Shalara was still standing, but he could see her working through the logic, and he kept his attention on her. His solution was the Silver Rule. You do to others as they do to you. Good with good, bad with bad. It was more of a soapbox than he wanted to be standing on, and Tom took a deep breath. The anger was gone. Not forgotten, but set aside. He cleared his throat and looked back at Shalara. "Does that answer your question, Cadet Senior Agent?" "I think so, sir, but sometimes fighting is the only option." Shalara was standing back at attention now, and it felt like a sign of something. "What happens when you humans need to fight?" "Are you asking why people backed against a wall will fight?" Tom said slowly, drawing out the self-evident. "Or why humans will?" Shalara raised her head. The girl was in the bleachers over him, and her eyes were focused on the board. "Respectfully, sir, I am asking about humans." There was a clatter as Letsy dropped her omnipad and bent to scoop it up, but otherwise the room had fallen silent. Save for the gentle rush of air from the heating vents, you could have heard a pin drop. And there it is. You knew this was coming. You've been hiding in a tiny class of 12 and teaching cute marriage tips, but now there's one that wants to know about the Resistance. Not about my personal baggage. The Resistance. "Cadet, my eyes are down here." His mouth felt dry and he licked his lips, but he nodded when she looked down at him. What had Sherman said? If war is the remedy your enemies have chosen, then you give them all they want. You can make a war so terrible, make them so sick of war, that generations will pass before it holds any appeal. And there it is, right in the open for the class. And the princess, and probably Interior Agent Bobby Davari and Death's Head Candid Camera, might as well go the full Monty. The only reason the Resistance died on Earth is because the Imperium kept making good on its promises. Cleaning up the environment, curing cancer, feeding the hungry. Unlike almost every other conqueror in our history, the Imperium has made good. You came in like the Romans and you brought the aqueducts, the wine and the medicine. But you went all the way and made us citizens too. Second-class citizens, sometimes. But you did it. For all the lives lost, the Imperium is making it right, one life at a time. It hasn't saved 1,000 lives for everyone it took, but it's getting there. But don't think people aren't counting. The Resistance on Earth did not die because of lasers fired or boots on the ground. It died because the Imperium made good, and it better keep making good, or goddess have mercy on you. Because humanity damn well won't. His voice wasn't the least bit feminine, something Shovanti girls would see as authority figure material. Maybe it was their reaction to father figures. In the end, it didn't matter. Cadet Amandis! Cadet Elidri! Tom barked out. It was a hard tone he hadn't used since the Air Force, but he hadn't forgotten how. The girls shot to their feet like a gun had gone off. Sir! They chorused. Cadets, you wanted to know the lesson you're supposed to learn from this. If you can join, should I do this exercise again... Tom growled with feeling. The animal deep inside stirred. If you ladies want to know what it's all about, you will review the files I give you after class. All of you ladies will watch the file labelled, They Shall Not Grow Old, before you return. You will not discuss those files with the participants as this is a graded exercise. Am I crystal clear? This was something to be said for IOTC training. The girls shot to their feet as one. Sir! Yes, sir! Cadet Senior Agent. Tom stuffed the animal back down in its box, refusing to feed it anymore. He forced himself back into teacher mode. Calm, conversational. When it comes to moral authority, whatever you're willing to kill or die for, you have the moral responsibility to be certain it's worth it. Class dismissed. It wasn't his class, not the IOTC girls. He didn't have the right to give orders, hand them assignments, or make demands, but right now he didn't care. They'd come as an audience. They could damn well learn the lesson too. Fuck. I hope this doesn't bite me in the ass. It wasn't quite lunch, and Vedeem had the time to talk. The afternoon crowd was coming in, but his father had become very understanding when it came to calls from his girlfriend. No big surprise. Still, the crowd was still light enough that the guys on the floor could handle it. Besides, it was worth it. Melondi. To him, she would probably always be Melondi. Had already dropped one bombshell on him. True, he'd been looking for ways to help, but dealing with his father, on the other hand. Now she was telling him all about Mr. Warwick's class that morning. It was kind of shocking. He'd always seemed so normal. The odd thing was that as shocked as he felt, she didn't seem upset about it at all. He knew she looked up to Warwick, but she seemed almost... It was something to think about later. It wasn't a bad thing. Anyway, he had his own problems, and listening to Melondi was always such a mixed blessing. Against the big issue, a human being alien didn't really count. He loved Melondi, but Melondi was Princess Kalira. How could he say, I love you to someone like that? If he said it first, then what if she thought it was because she was a princess? If their relationship moved ahead, sooner or later his own station would get out to the people who knew her as Kalira. He was a Dasari. She wasn't just a Tasu in the extended family. She was an imperial Tasu. Capital letters. People would think he was a gold digger, a fortune hunter, a boy beneath his station trying to score big. How could he say I love you to someone like that? I know it's a big ask, but tell your father I have the funds to make it good, Melondi said suddenly. Anyway, I have to catch up with the others. I love you. I love you too. He said it, and it felt easy. Natural. All these weeks he'd been twisting himself up inside out over how to say it, and it just slipped out. See you soon. Melondi sounded on top of the world, and his heart did a happy flip, and she ended the call. Bye. That was a thing. Vedeem set his omnipad down. All that angst over how to tell her he loved her. But to think on it, the question had always been, how? Maybe if you had to ask yourself if you loved someone, then it was a sign that you didn't. And she said it. Someone has a big silly smile on their face. His father sounded as suave as ever as he strolled over. Sure, he had been watching, but at least he waited until the call was over. Clearly everything's going well, my boy. Vedeem knew he was blushing as his father set a hand on his shoulder before pinching his cheek. It made him feel like he was 5, but somehow he didn't care. His father leaned down and nodded. You haven't looked this happy since your 5th birthday. He couldn't tell anyone about that. I mean, I love you? That was, well, maybe later. Right now, there was lunch and... there is something. Melondi had a favor to ask us. Well, you know, as her. Vedeem stood up then, canting his head and smoothing over his mustard shirt, before pulling on the deep orange blazer. Studying the effect for a moment, he pulled at his cuffs and sniffed. Anything. She needs us to shut down the restaurant for a week. A week? That's a lot of money! Oh, this wasn't going well. He was already clutching at his heart and going into full celebrity chef mode, and once that happened... She's going to pay us! There's a bonus too! Vedeem rushed to get the words in. We need to train a whole new staff on how to serve. Even in the noise of the kitchen, he lowered his voice to a hiss. They're all IOTC girls. You know, Junior Interior. It's for the meal we're serving at the Northern Palace. Paid in full? And the bonus? Vedeem stood up, looking off into the distance with a thoughtful muse on his face. But the pouty expression faded as he thought it over. IOTC girls? Yeah, we have to teach them to wait tables. Purple service and all. Training them? His father looked at his jacket intently, brushing at one sleeve. Vedeem breathed a silent sigh of relief. Do you think they'd give me one of those purple uniforms? Vedeem grinned like there was a 50% off sale on at his favorite shop. In purple, I look marvelous! Father, you should get one too. Women just love cute men in uniforms. A whole room of IOTC girls and all of Mel's friends. Vedeem could already feel himself turning blue. Father... I can't help being fabulous. Besides, you're a wonderful matron. Vedeem sniffed, waving his left hand dismissively, while examining the nails in his right. What's the worst that could happen?